But then, I have a couple introductory slides here, and then, my goal is just we generally kind of talk about Java on Domino. It's meant to be unfocused. It's not me instructing everybody, but I do have backup slides just in case everybody wants to hear me ramble on about a handful of Java topics that I have on hand. So I'm pretty sure this is unnecessary for this group, but here's my information. I'm me. So there you go. So like I said, goals, pretty ad hoc, discussion of how people are doing Java dev now, kind of hopes and dreams for the future. And, I jotted down some potential topics. I had to put XPages on there because somebody has to talk about it at some point, I suppose. But then, there's other stuff that I've been doing or I've seen other people doing where, you could do OSGI packaged web apps and use the Open Liberty runtime, which is my project. Domino data remotely and Docker, that sort of stuff. So I guess to kind of kick it off, I'll talk a little bit about how I've been using it lately and like what I've been running into, because the general elephant in the room remains that XPages is barely a thing at this point. It's hanging on for dear life. You can still do stuff with it. It'll still work, but it's out of my consideration essentially, even though I still do work with it. So like, for example, I keep mentioning my big client project on my site where it's like, that's kind of my case study. And that one's still largely, 90% XPages. But over the years, we've been adding more REST services, and now new and rewritten modules are done using, I think, Angular. It doesn't matter because it's just consuming REST services, so I don't have to care. So that's still doing its thing. XPages are chugging along there. I've done all that work with the ODP tooling and the XPages on better servers, runtime stuff, just to lower my hassle. So technically the way I'm running XPages is noticeably better than it was before, but it's still as limited as ever. But that's still going. I expect it will still go. But in general, I've been focusing, when I can, sometimes it's stuff to pay the bills, sometimes it's not. Like, for example, my blog is using the Open Liberty runtime, which lets me not have to worry about really much of anything with Domino. Where I can, if I want to access Domino data, I can, but otherwise, I'm not stuck with any given servlet version. I'm not stuck, it's running. I had to lower the Java version a little bit because of one component being weird, but otherwise I can choose my Java version. I can choose my tool set. It's all nice. But that's pleasant. And then you can have, I know that Stefan Whistle has been big on Vertex for a while, and that's a nice way where it's like, it's not servlet at all. It's just running, and then if you run it in kind of the process space of Domino, you can access everything locally and everything goes smoothly. That is veers further into that requires quite a bit of Java knowledge or quite a bit of infrastructural knowledge, but it has a lot of benefits as far as runtimes and capabilities and that sort of stuff. So I guess just in general, how have you guys been actively approaching Java dev with Domino lately?
Well, for me, we were doing everything business logic wise in our own extension library, and then using the page controller stuff, which I think we've all seen and talked about before. So that was mostly where our Java and Domino was, through XPages applications, relying heavily on Java with almost no server-side JS.
Yes, and I'm running lots of XPages. Well, you could say fully invested in XPages, but also lots of Java in the backend. So I'm your first bullet point. XPages and OCI plugins.
Yeah, on my side,
Old school.
I have been working on pluginizing ongoing Xbase projects mostly for a couple of years, but that project has been closed lately. So basically, I redirected myself to Apache Wing servlets mostly, and I have been, I don't know, probably working on RESTful stuff for a couple of years now. And also, I'm trying to somehow convert ongoing Xbase live. I have worked on converting ongoing Xbase projects into plugin libraries because we had a dream working on the same code base with multiple projects. But it turned out not a good idea at the end, because the designer is not a good platform for especially OSGI stuff. So running a parallel Eclipse is also not a good idea as a development alternative if you are caring about extensions and Xbase components, etc. It's not a good idea. So basically, right now the market is going to RESTful mostly. Ongoing Xbase projects are going to live for a while, I guess. But most people are looking into ways to get more efficiency from Xbase and from RESTful services or OSGI servlets, etc.
Yeah, we're here with pretty similar to what you've just said. Oh, so but we did go with the external Eclipse and common plugins. So all our Java coming from the plugins. So there's pretty much no Java inside the NSF. And it's good in that sense, but as you are right, it's painful. Like now, after upgrading to Designer 11, I can't even seem to, I don't know, build plugins or whatever. It's become a joke. And then so even just adding a new property to a user control is extremely slow and painful. And so it was good to have all the business logic in the one spot, but then the user interface was hard to keep consistent. Like obviously the controls were consistent, but then all the custom controls and all that prepackaged sections of pages just kept having to copy and paste it to different NSFs. And so we're looking at, moving off to Jakarta AEE and Prime Faces and things like that, and using obviously REST services as well.
Yeah, like everyone, I was recently moving everything to the GI plugins and try to keep it there. And even further, what I witnessed in past months, where a few developers even rejected to work with Domino completely, and they just use the IOP to talk to Domino to get the data and be free from all the dependencies and all the hell that we have to be dealing with. Because in past, I was just putting everything into GI plugins or even just plain XPages project. And for example, for the scheduling part, I was calling local agents, calling shell agents, and which called the XPages to get to the runtime, but not anymore. Yeah, we are looking for other options, and probably something that lives outside of Domino is probably the better way. And I've played with the updev pack with the Java API recently to see if it's the way forward to get to the Domino using the gRPC. But I don't know if ATL will actually maintain it or they will kill it along the way like they did to other pieces of tech that I liked in the past. So yeah, we will see.
The last time I used Domino or XPages is 2017. So
congratulations.
Good for you. You're winning.
And then this was a support group, right?
That was when we migrated an XPages application to Spring Boot and migrated all the data first to CouchDB, to Cloudant and CouchDB, and afterwards to Mongo. And in 2 weeks, in the evening work, so 14 evenings, everything was migrated. And I was happy to shut down Domino Designer. And till now, I doesn't have to start the parallels anymore. It's
In now and then, Frank,
it's Mac
Domino,
development.
yeah, Domino changed its logo for 3 times, I guess.
Yeah, I don't bother. I'm in the Java Spring world, and I'm very happy.
What do you use for a front end to your Spring world? Are you doing microservices? What's the front end? Are you doing time leaf or and
in one project for the city of Amsterdam, we use time leaf. It's very useful. It's easily integrated in Spring. I used before Prime. I did a project with Prime phases, but time leaf is really fully integrated with Spring Security, Spring, the whole Spring framework. It's very easy, and it's lots of similarities with XPages.
Oh, absolutely.
Easy to learn.
But we had people
using
designer. Time leaf. So we had people on the team using time leaf. I wasn't allowed to play with it because I had to do all the old XPages stuff and keep the business running. But time leaf looked interesting for sure.
Yeah, it's very easy. It's easy to use, and you can use IntelliJ as an IDE as well.
IntelliJ is nice.
I can only tell from myself. I'm working with XPages only. All the other words on the potential topics list are not on my list. Most of all them. For the rest, we've been trying to use some Domino data remotely, but we don't really need it at this time. So it's mostly XPages, pure XPages. I must be the only one in the world probably who's still using XPages only.
No. I mean, my former company was, and
No,
I'm talking about a contractor job of doing some XPages application development. So
yeah, Paris, his solution of Paris.
I'm a full-time XPages developer, chef.
Yeah.
So
okay, great.
There are more.
Yeah, you're not alone.
So I know from Mark Leusink.
Yeah.
Their solution is still primarily XPages. They're moving away slowly, but I know the big part is XPages.
Okay, we chucked the Java, the SSJS stuff almost immediately because it's unworkable. So we changed a lot to Java, and that it works. What we want to do with it, we can make it work. Sometimes with a little trouble, but okay.
That's a clever decision.
Yeah, that's XPages. There's always a little trouble.
Well, and the concern about you're saying, oh, I must be the only one left. There's a lot to the original dream of XPages still, and there's a lot that goes that there's reasons to still do stuff with it. I mean, whenever I'm talking about Java generally, and whenever I'm trying to actively do something that I enjoy, it's always about either not XPages or moving away from it. But being able to just have what it was originally was a nicer web thing to go in the same vein of the classic Notes stuff. So you just open up Designer, you have all your stuff there. You just say new XPage, you can start typing away, and then there you go. It's just working, and it accesses your data, and it's all contained. It replicates nicely. That whole story is still pleasant. It's a lot easier to do that than it is to, for example, try to extract all these jars into a web app and then make this a thing and try to connect to that and make sure that you're using your threads properly so that your server doesn't crash. And all this extra stuff that I do either for work or for fun is, much harder and much more complicated. And sometimes it's just really nice to say, look, this is the thing. And my app is the NSF or NSF and plugins, which I can deploy via update site NSF. And there's a lot to be said for it.
Also, you should keep in mind that we are not doing something that is completely rival to XPages. I mean, apart from Frank, probably. But for instance, what I'm doing is specialized servlets doing specific functions inside inside Domino that cannot be done by anything else, but they are not applications. At the end of the day, applications are developed by other teams with I don't know, fancy front-end technologies, etc. But bigger teams are working on those applications. Maybe they are fancier than our Xbase applications, but at the old time, in the old time, Xbase is kind of the last generation of rapid application development. Yeah, in 10 minutes you can develop a basic crude application with the stylish look. But the problem is, at the end of the day, it's not going somewhere. So as a developer, you can't depend on, as a freelance developer, you can't depend on right now. That's why that's why I am leaving that track, because I don't have a customer right now demanding a new Xbase applications anymore.
Yeah, it's the same here.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Just follow the money, as US people mostly always say. Yeah, there are no projects in Xpage. It's Java, it's Spring, it's Angular, React sometimes.
Yeah,
So,
so the overall landscape was totally different 10 years ago or 12 years ago when XPages was new, because everyone was running Domino. It was there and you were just building apps on Domino. And basically you got the platform for free, but nobody is willing to invest into Domino infrastructure nowadays. And I don't see any new customers who would buy the platform just because of the stuff that's currently being provided, because everyone has some solution for email and for the app dev. Yeah. You start from scratch on something open source free. You are not tied to some company that basically holds the future for the product and can change the direction at any time. Yeah, which happened, for example, for Xpages. But technically, when I, for example, compare now Xpages to HCL Vault from the rapid application development perspective, I think Xpages are still easier to use than the Vault. For example, because there is a learning curve, a lot of JavaScript if you want to do something a little bit more complex. So yeah, XPages are still nice, but as they are not evolving, yeah, it's heading to a dead end. Yeah. But it gets the job done. So for the low code and rapid application development, it's definitely getting still the job done.
Yeah, and also the NSF, it's nice, and lots of people are saying it's can do a lot, and it's true, it can do a lot. But look at Couch. Couch has a replication inside, contributed by IBM. So Couch has also reader fields, author fields. So there are lots of similarities, and I must say Couch is much faster than Domino or the NSF. So yeah, also customers are looking to other databases, NoSQL or SQL or whatever.
Of course, good stuff. No NSF minus IBM is Couch, so it's faster.
Yeah, and the funny part is that IBM has contributed a lot of to Couch. So yeah, currently I'm in Postgres. We're using it at the customer. Yeah, it's doing the job.
I really like Postgres. It's
easy.
Yeah, I love that I love that it's open source. I love that it's capable.
Yeah.
And it's extremely scalable. It's really nice.
Yeah. But the thing is, again, into the same topic. Yeah, going directly to some other similar. I mean, thinking about similar platforms like XPages, Spring is one example, but there are not much platforms in fact direct rival of XPages. I mean, one-man show, you can develop rapid application, you can develop quickly, and your at least business problems can be solved very with a cheap license with much functionality. There are not much alternatives. So
Spring is free.
Yes, no, I mean, yeah, transitioning to Spring is not an easy way, on the other hand, after XPages. It takes a lot of time. And also the customer base is completely changing. I mean, nobody is going, customers are not going from Domino to Spring. They are looking for different solutions. They are, in general, my customers, at least from my customer point of view, my customers are not leaving Domino to get other technologies. They are leaving Domino to get into other platforms. I mean,
Salesforce.
They are dropping, they are dropping Lotus and they are going to Salesforce. And Salesforce is not something that can replace Domino. It's a tailor-made application platform. It's not an application development platform. I mean, so nobody I see is in my portfolio, at least, going from Domino to Spring. So as a developer, it's a tough point. Either you will stay in Domino and keep your knowledge and try to see how much more you can handle that, or you should switch your track. And if you are a freelance, if you are out of customers, you need to switch track. And the thing is, these technologies, I mean, Liberty runtimes or Dockerized web apps, etc. These technologies might be low-hanging fruit for us, at least, with a little Java literacy, I guess.
Yeah, Open Liberty is also very, very useful.
Yeah,
I can say we used it as a customer. They were on Websphere, and I proposed to go to Liberty because it's faster, it's newer. So we did a successful migration from the Websphere application to Liberty.
I do appreciate that there's a common strain that I know, like Niklas Heidloff, part of his job now is that he shares these posts about, like, migrating from a Websphere traditional application to Websphere Liberty, which is, depending on what technologies you're using, it's a smaller task because, Websphere traditional is a Java EE app server. Websphere Liberty is a Java EE app server, and it's just nicer. But there's like, oh, well, if you were using this EJB technology, it's not there anymore. If you were using this, whatever, giant corporate thing from old Java EE, you can't use that. But that's something that that I do appreciate seeing. There's other transitions going on too. And when it comes to things like companies moving to Salesforce or whatever, that's always the wild card. Where, like, if you are working for a company that says we're going to another platform, or if you are a freelancer and then you can't find anything for XPages, like, well, I always enjoy just kind of looking into this stuff somewhat theoretically and hypothetically, in part because I'm lucky enough to be in a position where currently I get to, and so there's a lot of this stuff that does come from, what can I do in my free time, but then also what is actually good for work. So I have, I've mentioned a couple of times the XPages runtime project, which is, there's not a really good name for it, but that's essentially running XPages outside of Domino. And then that is what I do all the time when working for my client, because in that case, I just keep running XPages apps, but I have it in a little Liberty server, and I don't have to, I don't have to do that deploy, install new OSGI plugins in Designer and Domino, restart, all this stuff. You could do the run from PDE thing with the XPages SDK, but that kind of work of, like, improving the development experience is how I spend a lot of my time, where it's stuff like I forget who mentioned, but Domino or Designer 11 made it more difficult, and I think that we can pin that on the kind of hobble JVM that they have in there, where they don't have that, like, 3 or 4 gigabyte RAM barrier where, because I run into that a lot. I'll install a new set of plugins and then Notes just won't launch because it runs out of memory when it's trying to configure the new plugins and then dies, and I have to delete the workspace and go over again. And I think that's due to the memory limitations in the JVM, which
I've also found an infinite loop in there. Because I was wondering why I kept having to end this. I made a specific change to a custom control, and then anytime I opened it up, it just hung. So I got out the Java debugger and hooked it up, and it's just if you type the same word like right near another word and there's a problem, it gets stuck in a string loop trying to search a range of the string and just never finishes. So that's still there, and I'm sure they'll fix it if I report it. So.
This is Designer 11?
Designer, yeah.
If
there's a problem marker on a line and it's looking for some word that's also nearby, it just spins round and around.
It starts with 11, right?
No, it's probably been there for a while.
Yeah.
If I looked at the plugin date, it wasn't a recent year.
It's probably original.
And I had tried to debug this with support and spend an hour. This is before I figured out it was an infinite loop. And they said, we can only fix it if you give us your entire IP. Like they wanted me to send everything to them so they could reproduce it on their machine. But I'd already sent them like a 4 gig dump file. Anyway, that's my little story.
Because of this Eclipse setup, it's a pain to upgrade my server and client anymore. So I dropped at some point, probably around 10, and I can't upgrade anything because every upgrade I need to set up my target platforms, PD, etc., everything from bottom to top. Ridiculous.
One of the other through lines in a lot of the work I do is fighting against the various tool chains and development environments that I've adopted, where like I'll start using something and then eventually like I hate this and I want to get rid of it. Designer's the prime candidate, and I could use that as a punching bag all day. But I go back and forth on. I've been doing more work lately to be like, all right, I'm tired of using Tycho as a Maven build extension because it has these limitations about OSGI and what I do there. And I'm like, all right, I want to do all this stuff to get rid of that so I can get that off my plate. And then using Tycho means that I'm basically stuck with Eclipse, which I have a very love-hate relationship with. There are times where I'll go and like Eclipse is everything I want. It's nice and smooth. Like a new release comes out, like this is great. They added these new features. But then there'll be times where like, yeah, but I wouldn't mind using Visual Studio Code some more. Or maybe I should give IntelliJ another shot. And one of the nice things is that like the more you do kind of like, there are so many things with Domino that are sticky as far as what your tool chain is. So there's like the fact that for XPages, you either need to use Designer or you need to re-implement the entire lower level, tool chain as I did. Those are not great options. But then it's like, okay, well, if you want to use Notes jar, you have to like, it's not readily available everywhere. So you have to copy it around or point at it some way. If you actually want to run anything, you have to have a Notes runtime, or you have to run it in Docker. Or if you want to target OSGI, even if you're not running it locally, you have to worry about what works with what versions will work with this. Will it complain about servlet? Will this, will there be a problem because all of a sudden they put Tika in the class path in 11, which wasn't there before? If I had Tika, now I have a problem. And like all these little things of like, okay, it's like slogging. Yeah, like all these little things of like slogging through, like, okay, I got to deal with this, and then which leads to kind of like one of the the refreshingness, how refreshing the experience is of dealing with basically anything else. Certainly there are plenty of heavy business tool chains that are worse, but just when you say like, okay, I want to do, and I always go to Open Liberty, but you can take that as a stand-in for any other server. So like Glassfish, Payaro, any of those, and it's like you do that and you're like, I follow a tutorial, it just works. I want to add in poi to my app, I just add a dependency on poi and there it is. I want to add in whatever to my app, I just add that as a dependency, and I follow a tutorial that somebody wrote that wasn't somebody who specializes in XPages specifically, and I just do that and it works. And it's like Like this is just how things work, and all the tools are geared towards making these things work, which is not the case with a lot of Domino focused things.
That is the hard point to start. That's the problem. This is a problem with Java. It's not about Domino or XPages, because for ages I have been trying to understand what this Maven is, and I thought I understood that, and I dangled with this Tycho stuff. Recently, I had to rebuild a Mavenized project, and I failed. I failed terribly. And also, I'm having a lot of troubleshooting stuff lately, especially whenever an Xbase developer develops something terrible and it's having a huge performance problem. It comes to me because I'm a half-blood admin at night. So, so basically, I'm also writing a lot of simple scripts to crash servers in Node.js. So these are basic load testers with specific scenarios, because I'm attacking these servers to crash them to detect those code failures. And after I've seen these JavaScripts building, it's basically the same thing what Maven is supposed to do, but it's ridiculously simple, and it works flawlessly. And right now, I believe the Java has its own complication. It's complicating things a lot. Doing your many simple stuff on Java, you are facing something like configuring 200 servers at a time and configuring a lifelong project with 2,000 developers at the same time, and this is the same complication with simple scripted solution. That's annoying, really annoying. And I don't get a Maven code up and running in 10 minutes so far. I haven't been able to do that. That's also a big challenge in front of Domino and Java, because add entire ridiculous stuff inside Domino, mostly connected to C libraries, add these complication to the Maven complication, and it gets you get lost.
Yeah. So
automatically.
I'm curious, when you've been doing Maven stuff, has it been like has this been specifically always in the context of like Tycho and building stuff for Domino, or like following like a Maven Hello World kind of tutorial, like without Tycho and without that?
Tycho is becoming a part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like
eventually, when you want to build something with Maven, because other than building, it's just dependency management is not that, because for my side, dependency management is not a huge topic for me, because I used a couple of libraries and they are all predefined in my mind before starting the project. And the first thing I do, if I'm not using Maven, the first thing I do, I download those jar files, etc., set my projects up, and that's it. I never touch dependencies anymore. So dependency management perspective is not very useful for Maven in our projects.
Well, I think that the I think that Tycho has kind of, and it certainly did this with me. It makes it very easy where, like, if your introduction to Maven is via Domino stuff, like, with me it was via Oda, and I know that like the rest of the team was also driven fairly insane, probably in some cases literally, by the experience of Mavenizing this. And what that comes down to is that essentially, like, if you have like OSGI plugins and you say, I want to Mavenize these, you're really doing two things at once. One is that you're learning what Maven is, and how it generally works, but then you're also learning how the specialized Tycho version of a Maven build works, which is very different from a normal Maven build. And this took me a good while to reckon with properly, because if you're doing like say you just want to do a basic XPages library, like the kind that I've had on tutorials on my site and that kind of thing, where it's just like you use stuff that's built into Domino, and you say, I want to use xlibutil and I want to have a manage bean that returns hello world or whatever. If you're doing that with Maven, suddenly you have to know, oh, I have to have a OSGI update site of note stuff around. I have to put that somewhere in my file system. I have to learn about the settings.xml file and put the property in there. If I want to point to any of these, now I'm doing manifest.mf, but if I go and say I want to add it, like if I search for how to add a dependency on poi in Maven, it'll say add this dependency block, and then you'll try that and it won't work because you're dealing with Tycho, and then you have to worry about all these little things, and then suddenly like you're learning all this stuff, and your XML for your POM is this giant wall of text, and you're starting with like, what the heck is any of this? And that's kind of like one of the things that has collectively scarred a lot of us coming from Domino, where Maven has its flaws, but once you add Tycho in there, Tycho it does exactly what it says it does, and it does it swimmingly. But specifically what it does is it makes stuff for Eclipse platforms, which is not what Maven necessarily is for. And it says, like, we're going to take an Eclipse project, which Domino is very, very, very geared towards, more than other OSGI platforms even. It's specifically that kind of frozen in time Eclipse version of it. But like a normal Mavenized app is like you have this little bit of code, and then you're off to the races, especially if you say, I just want to do a, Jakarta EE8 tutorial. You'll have like a little POM that says import this stuff, and then you can just do your thing, and then it's much smoother. But then as soon as you add anything Domino wise into it, which, kind of comes into some of these ideas for like, how would you even do this generally if you don't want to do XPages specifically, you still have to worry about, well, notes jar, again, isn't readily available. You have to worry about dependencies, things like that, where like these are things that are kind of like taken off your plate normally. And in this good case of Maven, this would also apply to Gradle. I don't know if there are any other build tools that are newer than that, because I know Ant is still there. But Maven and Gradle are similar in this, where like it's all extremely common and it all just kind of like works together. But then when you add in all these astrices with Domino, which comes into play whether you're using Designer or you're targeting it, of especially like, can I use this library? How do I use this library? Do I have to wrap it in something? For example, downloading jars, like you said, works. You want to make a plugin and put jars in there, that will work. But what you're doing is kind of like the 2001 version of Java development, where you just get these class files in jars and you put them into your project and say, okay, now I have my web app wrapped in OSGI, or now I have my servlets, or now I have my XPages library. But you don't get inline Java doc or sources or an easy way to just say, now update all my dependencies to the latest versions, and nice packaging and all this sort of stuff. And
Yeah,
I know
also,
Yep. Sorry.
one issue with Maven was eventually a lot of time I consumed was the disk size of the Maven, because it gets bigger and bigger. And a couple of times I dropped Maven just because of this, because after a while I look at it, and 30 gigs of cache and class files downloads in my home folder, and this is specific to Maven, I guess. Is it? Or
well, I mean, it depends on what you're doing. If you're downloading it, like if you have a lot of projects that use various plugins and chains and stuff, that can get big, but it's not specific to Maven. I mean, Gradle would do the same thing. NPM, Lord knows, does the same thing with node modules. That can get to be a gigantic black hole. So it does depend a bit on what you're doing, because Maven, like the first time you run anything, you have this giant chain of like downloading this, and it just like fills up your M2 repository, which is kind of part of the setup, because essentially what it's doing is downloading this whole kind of like development and building tool chain in the background. Certainly can get big. 30 gig might be a little large, but still, like that. Yeah, it happens, but it's not specific to Maven.
I think it was after trying to build extension library, social business toolkit, and OpenNTF ODA at the same time, and it gets much bigger than that, and it gets out of control after a point. Yeah, a couple of times I had issues with Maven itself. So a couple of times from Tycho, from build problems. Notch.jar is still a huge problem. All projects of mine, every project has a different style to add Notch.jar to my project.
Yeah.
Every time I use a different methodology. But at the end, I think the next step of Java development is a little bit depends on what the customers are doing. I mean, I don't know if anyone here took care of this new, for instance, the gRPC support. We talked about gRPC support. It's something new, and it's going to take some traction in the future, because it's a cheap method to get some data from Domino and use wherever you want to use without this old style Domino API. So it's something new. So it is probably going to depend on what kind of applications people are going to use in the future. Because in the Liberty world, in the Domino world, if you are using Java, you are quite limited with some options.
Is anyone using like DAS? Because I was considering that as all these problems with the Domino platform.
Right.
And the last month or two, I've been looking at starting up in the Jakarta EE world. And similar to what you said, Seda, I really didn't enjoy the Mavenizing of the extension library because I was already building it in Eclipse. And then this new thing came on, and it just, anytime I wanted to do something small, it slowed me down. But setting up the projects in Maven in Jakarta EE, it's logical, like it's happening as I expect. I can structure the projects to be in a hierarchy, and it's not as confusing as it was in when it was an OSGI Tycho thing. And then at the same time, I'm thinking, how am I going to straddle these two worlds of Domino and the new world? And I kind of just want a bit of a clean cut, really. I don't want to bring in any of those, now I have to think about, this part of it. So I was looking at the Domino Access services for the times when I need to access or update things in the Domino server, because that way I don't have the C runtime involved or anything like that. So I was just wondering if anyone else has used that, or if there's similar problems with that when you go, but you can't, use the Domino Access.
I think at that point, instead of Domino Access services, probably the AppDev Pack, the new DQL and AppDev Pack Java stuff will be more useful in terms of performance, in terms of stability and robustness. Because at the end of the day, you need to have an application, this part, and you have a Domino application, and they are going to be decoupled. And only communication between them is a network channel, REST channel, which is not very trustworthy and very fast. And at the end of the day, Domino Access Services is one of the slowest ways right now to access Domino data, because it's really slow. It's a general purpose library. And DQL at this point is quite ambitious in terms of performance. The only problem in that part, I mean gRPC part, is it still lacks some implementation. It's not there yet. It didn't implement everything yet, but it evolves quite fast.
It also depends how you want to call it, because it works well if you are calling it just with a technical account, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you are running just with the Proton task and doing the communication through that. But if you want to access it with user credentials, you need the IAM server, and the setup is getting much more complex. So, and what I was trying in past weeks was the Proton task and the Java communication directly against it, and it worked pretty well. And I know that HCL is planning some new features in 107, 108 release, but yeah, we will see how far they will get, because for example, for the Node.js version, I think they were talking about it for, I don't know, last 2 years, and it didn't evolve that fast. Yeah, we've expected the results much sooner, but yeah, it was in the transition period. So maybe they will evolve a little bit faster now, but I guess the future for them is the project Keep. So they will be building the API, the REST APIs on top of project Keep, and the updev pack will be something for some special use cases only. Yeah, so.
I think that those are, at least currently, entirely separate.
Yeah.
Just for like organizational purposes, because the app dev pack stuff is kind of coming from core and not labs, I think. So it's kind of like to be determined how that shakes out. I think with both of those routes, one of the main things that like would become a sticking point is what you're talking about, where it depends on the run as user capability, where they both have their kind of like their wrinkles about how you would go about doing that. So with the app dev pack, you either run as just a fixed user, essentially kind of like how you would access a Postgres database or another one, where like you don't have the individual users operating on the database, but rather the app is the user, and then you control what they can do in the app, which loses a little bit of the Domino benefits. Or you would do that, the IAM server, and then you bounce the users against that. I've always found that constraining, because I like to be able to just say I want to have a session as a user, which you can do with the native API, but you can't necessarily do remotely. With DAS, you could do it if you had a DSAPI filter or you use the Websphere connector headers. Like if saying your Domino server is not front facing, like it's just in your data center or behind the firewall, and then you have your app itself say I want to access DAS, but then add a header saying I'm acting as this user, that should work. But then you do run into, I think it is like, it's not the best performance, probably could be improved. And then it's also just limited to what DAS has implemented, which is, pretty good view and document access, but I can only assume there's nothing about DQL in there, because, it wildly predates that, and it's not really a heavily active thing. And there's CalCon stuff in there as well. But as far as like data access goes, it would be functional. I mean, it's not, there are other databases that where you can just, one of the main ways to access them is HTTP and you get JSON back. Like it's not a terrible way to do it. And the nice advantage there would be you kind of take quite a bit off the plate of your app. Like you don't have that notes jar problem. You don't have I just want to test it, but I have to worry about like a local runtime with the notes libraries loaded up and getting all that stuff linked up. And at that point, it could be whatever language you want, because you're just accessing REST, so it doesn't matter at all. So that would be nice. I found like in my development that is like the asterisks are large enough that I haven't, but that certainly would. That's a potential nice way of doing it, and say like I don't even want to deal with running code on Domino. I am running code remotely without worrying about having like the specialized notes runtime involved.
Chime in here a little bit. So I recently haven't touched the platform since 2013, but I recently talked to a company who has one of their partners has a few systems of record in Domino servers, and so I've been trying to figure out what they're looking for, and they're trying to say everything is a stream. An event stream, but their preferred format is Avro. They use the schema registry in Avro as the one true schema source, and generate all the classes from there. So I'm just initial conversations with them. But anyhow, that's why I joined this morning, is to see what people are working with, kind of from the outside, Domino looking in, just as a data source. Not sure where that one's going to go, but that's why I'm here.
So what? I have not heard of Avro. So what is that?
It's a binary format. It's an alternative to protobuf, for example. It probably slightly larger payloads, and it has probably a little better schema evolution story. And I think if you go with the vendor, it's open source, but I think there's a vendor involved, and they have a schema registry. And so you can have all multiple versions of your schema in play at time. They can be cached and then looked up if necessary. And so you can evolve your schema, and all without breaking anything. It's backwards compatible that way. So in other words, it's an alternative to protobuf. Think of it that way.
Yeah, we use it Kafka at a customer.
They're posting stuff on Kafka, and they're consuming it with Spark and Flink. They have some Akka in play. I've been doing Play and Akka for the past 5 or 6 years. So that's kind of how I was brought into, at least for initial discussions in the project. But the Domino server is a partner of theirs. And right now there's just some Java API. I know they're sending JSON or something over, but they're just exploring the idea because they think this app will be around for a couple more years. It's they just want to understand the feasibility of it. So my understanding is that Domino now has some kind of event stream with protobuf. Is that correct?
Well, it has the. I think protobuf only comes into play as the transport layer for the app dev pack. But they were talking about having publishing events, which is not implemented.
Okay, right.
But that maybe still on the plate. I think they said that they had to go back to the drawing board on that one.
Yeah, they're thinking.
That's a dream.
It's about the security. I spoke to people of ACL about this, and they want to make it possible to produce actions or to a stream.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only a sort of a document unique ID, and then via REST you have to catch the consumer has to catch via REST the rest of the document.
Oh, so if you go that way, they go through the security layer, but at least they're notified that something changed here. I was hoping.
I told them that this will not fly because that's not the principle of PubSub.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not real event based programming. But the thing is the Domino here. It's not a high volume compared to the stuff they're processing with Spark and on Kafka. And that's flying. But it is a system of record, and so they need to at some point merge this in with some other data. So I understand from the Domino perspective, just publishing events. Stream of all change events from a server or maybe with some kind of criteria, there's still the whole Domino security to come into play. So yeah, I didn't know where that was at. And again, I just had the conversation the other day. Don't even know if it'll go anywhere. So
yeah, in Kafka, there's the security is on the Kafka. On Kafka, you can block your the consumers from your producer. So yeah, I was really surprised about this extra loop. They are thinking about to get all the data from the document. So
it is. I mean,
it's a 2 steps procedure, and it's not the way PubSub is working.
It would work, I think, in this situation. It's not a super high volume. It's not a performance issue. It's just that right now the infrastructure they have set up, plus the internal knowledge they have of processing events off a stream where they expect that event has the data and is ready to go. They can just finish their processing with it. But most of what I'll be doing is just back-end API, probably Play framework kind of stuff for them, which is what I'm doing. Yeah.
But there are plans in the app dev pack. But I don't know how far.
Right. I'll keep an eye on that. I've been, sitting in the sidelines for years, but interested in what HCL is doing now that they're actually investing and listening to customers. That's a good thing.
Yeah. And I think along those lines, I think I will be interested to see what HCL does. I mean, there have been fits and starts. I mean, they've, can't get around the fact that for a couple years now they've said like, oh, we'll have a roadmap for our XPages, just come back next quarter. And then later it's like, so where's that roadmap for XPages? Like, next quarter, we're gonna have something for you next quarter. And it's like, okay, I mean, I get it. Like, they have a lot on their plate. They have a lot of ambitions. They are doing interesting things. They've bought a bunch of products. They've fielded, I think, 10 different vaults at this point. Like, there's a lot going on, and it's tough because like Domino has been a mess for a long time. I mean, you know, IBM did not leave it well. It was not well tended. You know, for a couple of years now, my going line and like, what would I do with XPages is like, I just kill it, I guess. Like, you know, I have some ideas. I still, you know, write stuff with it, and like I have a blog post in draft form about like, what, you know, say it's dead, what do you even do with all this XSP markup, all this stuff? And it's a tough thing. But you know, to HCL's credit, they have been putting stuff out there. They've been fairly forward. I mean, they tend to be a little less forward when they decide to kill an idea than they are about when they have an idea. But I can sympathize. But like, you know, to their credit, they have been putting out a lot of stuff. They have been listening, you know, and for each of their moves, I totally get the logic, even when it's like, man, this does nothing for me. Like, I get why they're doing it, because they have customers and their customers have needs.
Probably the most difficult thing is fixing XPages and fixing designer in the world, because we can have a lot of ideas, we can have a lot of things to complain about it, but let's face the fact that the solution is not that simple. And if I were HCI, I would kill Xbase too. But on the other hand, you can't kill XPages because there are a lot of customers and you can't maintain it properly with a reasonable cost, because it's hard to maintain and you can't rewrite it. And that's the toughest problem to have, because the issue started very early, and if IBM has taken this topic in a different way, in a total different way 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, it would be quite different now. But they didn't, and now it's a very difficult, tough problem to solve.
This, you know, and what bothered me, I guess, is just as XPages was coming on, the Java world finally got moving again. Now Java's on the 6-month release train, great new features. I started programming in Scala for the past 6 years, but at least Java's has moved forward. And you came out with all these great JavaScript engines, and the JavaScript engine custom built for XPages was just ancient. I don't know if that's changed. Again, it's been years since I've looked in it, but
it's all original.
You can't move forward and take advantage of all this new stuff that makes life a lot easier, you know. So anyhow.
And you know, like, just the whole, you know, I don't even know what like we were saying, I don't even know what one would do with XPages. Like, it's not a clean superset of JSF, so you can't just say, oh well, we'll just bring in JSF and then we'll update that. I mean, JSF also petered out mostly, but it's still open source. It's still there. Like, there are companies supporting it, like Prime Faces and that sort of thing. So it's not dead. But also, like, it's, you know, since XPages did not diverge cleanly, then like that itself would be a monumental task of worrying, like, would this work? So it's like, okay, well, you don't really want to do that, but also, do you want to spend a lot of time on updating something that's essentially a Java EE5 era product, when, you know, that's a decade and a half out of date and out of step with everything else? And it's like, well, no, but on the other hand, you know, it's only a matter of time before Java 8 goes out of support, and then they got to move to 11, and it's like, well, you can't just, not everything will cleanly move to 11 because you have to do some work. And it's like, I don't envy their task, you know. And so, like, I think a lot of what it comes down to, and a lot of like why I spend so much time with the Open Liberty runtime and figuring out, like, can I run apps in Docker and have that be good? Can I run apps alongside Domino? Can that be good? Is just, you know, one of my overall goals is for myself and for customers to get to a point where we're not dependent on this situation again. You know, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I understand why we got here, but never again. Like, I don't want to do this again. So like, you know, even if they magically said, here's XPages 2 or 3, whatever they want to call it tomorrow, and it's like, it's totally revamped, it's totally modern. Would I trust it? No.
No.
If anything, the front end front end frameworks also came in. XPages
Right.
should be
Yeah.
as close to a React library as you can make it, but all on the React side of the world, or whatever your platform. But I've been working for these companies, and small companies and startups are all building on, I've been Play framework, but what I call the leaner, meaner Java framework, Spring Boot's very popular over Postgres, almost every one of them. And then they're using React or whatever in the front end, and that's it. And yeah, when you're doing that, you say, oh, this security thing or this thing would be really easy in Domino, but you know what? You find a way.
Yeah, well, and for everything that's a lot easier in Domino, readers fields, author fields, integrated authentication, which is usually nice, although sometimes not. For every one of those, there's also like I keep going back to the dependency thing or adding new technology, like in modern app servers with microprofile, you can just do open API generation for free. You don't have to like figure out how am I going to make an XPages library that will get all this stuff working in this environment and worry about crawling through the NSF. It's like, it's just there. And like, how do I do, like, there's like microservice health and metrics and stuff. You just do an annotation saying, I want to get health on this one. And I think this is all stuff that is in parallel with Spring Boot. Where this is, in microprofile and newer Jakarta EE stuff, they did a little catch up with Spring, but the ideas there are the same, where it's like, this is just stuff that you can just do. You say there's a new version out, upgrade probably will go just fine, and then you add new things. And
and the databases are there. Postgres, with you need JSON handling for that flexibility, or Mongo, you need a document database. And no, it's not an NSF exactly, but you get what you need fairly easy out of it.
Yeah. So we are making a wrong comparison here, because all these technologies are somehow open systems, so open development environments. So basically, wherever you go, if you are stuck with a closed loop, such a closed core source application development platform, you will end up with such thing. The only difference as well, IBM has, in general, Domino has been crushed under the promise that we are going to run Notes 1 databases as well. So that's a big crash. It's like Windows trying to run 16-bit applications from Windows 2.0. That was the wrong way to do this stuff in terms of from developer point of view, but it makes sense in the business world. But at the end of the day, when it's about a development environment, if that happens, if you can run Notes 1 applications, you cannot end up with a good source control thing or good project building system. So at some level, something goes, something comes.
Yeah.
But if you are going to pick next XPages, it's not going to be a vendor specific product.
Well, and that kind of came up a little bit in the open source roundtable at Digital Week last week. And the way I see that is that certainly going with an open source project for any part of your stack is not a guarantee that it will live forever. I mean, the world, GitHub is littered with dead open source projects. But similarly, because
I don't mean open source. I mean open technology, like technology that can be implemented by multiple parties at the same time. Or I guess I don't know. Apache drops it, and some other team takes from there to bring some other places. It's not specific product. It's a platform. With specific products, it's a huge issue. It's still a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean, and so I kind of figured that, like, if you're thinking of, okay, how am I going to do, imagining that you don't have any financial constraints, or like you get to pick your clients or whatever, like, what is the platform I want to use for this? And you want to go for something that, if it's a vendor-led thing, you want to have it so that the vendor is not likely to go anywhere, and also the vendor is very invested in making this thing going. So for example, if you say, I want to write an iOS app, you don't have a lot to worry about. Like iOS is not going to disappear, and Apple is not going to disappear, and Apple is very invested in making iOS work. But failing that, essentially, and ideally you want to make sure that no matter what you pick, whether it's an open source thing that maybe it'll peter out, if it's a vendor back thing, maybe it'll peter out, maybe it won't. You want to make sure that you have as clean of a path away from it as possible. Like, and that's one of those things that is difficult with Domino. Like, it's the data model, but also just the way that an XPages app is. It's certainly easier to take an XPages app. See you, Frank. It's certainly easier to take an XPages app and turn that into a normal Java thing than it is to take like a formula language based app and move it out of Notes. But it's still much more difficult than other things. Like, you want to have that escape plan of like, worst case, say that I build an app using this and then that platform decays over the course of 10 years. What do I do? And, that's one of the reasons why I focus on a lot of these, Jakarta and micro profile being outright open standards that are intended to be implemented by others. And then, but like with Spring is, that's still vendor run, but it is open source, and the community certainly has critical mass as far as like, if VMware says we're shutting down Pivotal, Spring can continue. Like, Spring will be a thing after that. And so like, you want to have either hopes that the platform itself will continue on, or it's easy to get your stuff out of there. Cause like, the way that XPages is designed, it's very easy to put all kinds of little hooks into like the extension library, like xlibutil and data and the Lotus Domino classes and all these little things that make it very, very, very difficult to take that code and put it anywhere else. Whereas if you're dealing with like, I'm starting clean, and you can always get yourself in trouble as a programmer. Like, there's no way to avoid that. But I think, just for future development and working with existing stuff, like that's one of my goals is like, if the worst case happens again, I want to be better protected than I was this past time. And I think that's just kind of like the general goal, and which, I mean, and speaking, and it sounds like kind of like a capstone thing. Like, I was kind of figuring we go till 3 and we're a little past that. So, in theory, I could keep talking forever, but I don't want to drag this whole thing to the ground. But like, my view on it in general is like, there are things we can do now and things that we can work on gradually, whether or not, no matter how you end up doing your code with Domino, whether it's still on there, whether it's adjacent to it, like, one of the big focuses is protecting your code, making it more portable, making it safer against trouble, essentially, in various forms.
Indeed.
Indeed.
Never again.
Yeah.
Yes.
Never again. And another thing is, like, similar to what David said, that you have to work on your existing. I'm in a similar situation with an in-house software, so I don't have an external customer, and obviously you're still supporting it. And you got to speak up and carve. Like at the last meeting, I said I have to work more on this next phase rather than the existing stuff, because it just can't go on forever. Like, if you don't set aside the time to do this stuff, it'll never happen, and it'll just be another year goes by and you still using kill notes 3 times before midday, and like, it's just going to be the same day as the year before.
Yeah.
So I've managed to wrangle a bit more of a buy-in from the company to move on.
My company sent me to a Spring Boot conference about 2 years ago. And then when I came back, they canceled all my Spring Boot projects because we got too busy with keeping the existing trucks moving. So they ended up hiring other people to work on Spring Boot, and I was kind of left behind.
Yeah, you're like a cautionary tale now, unfortunately.
Well, yes. Don't let what happened to Dave happen to you. So, and I could see the writing on the wall, but again, there's only so much time in the day, and if you don't have an outlet at work, it's really hard to, get up to speed and build stuff. So
right. Well, and that's that's one of the main troubles is like, say you're working at a company or you're working for a client and they say, we want to add a new user interface, like an admin panel for our ordering system, whatever, like some task, and you have like an existing XPages application and you think like, well, I could add an XPage and add some views to it and add some buttons and then be done. Or I could learn about how to do a Dockerized web app and figure all this stuff out and build this whole chain and then learn this new system and learn this new system and learn this. And it's like, well, that's not really practical. Like, you know,
if your data's still in Domino, you know,
right.
Why go to that level too? And
right.
But to begin with, I had to do all this nighttime learning pretty much, like, out of hours and in my own time. But then I got enough of it to a point where I could visualize a solution like that, like that is like a bit of a two birds with one stone. So I could then propose like, all right, why don't we just do this little part of it in this new technology, and then it'll still interact with the current systems. And I managed to like justify it that way, because it also is a better solution, because it was something that does is already duplicated in many of the systems we've got. So I'll be taking it out and centralizing it. So I managed to get to a point where I could say it's a benefit for the company.
Yeah.
But because otherwise you're in that endless loop, and it's, I don't know. You forget things. You learn it. If you don't use it, then it's 3 months later.
That's why you create a screencast, so you can remember it. When you're doing all this nighttime learning on your own time, you're like, I'm going to forget this stuff. So then you put it on YouTube. And when you need to do something you don't know how to do, then you beg someone like Jesse to buy him beer to come on and then do a screencast.
Yeah.
It can work. It's a working model. It's just a lot of energy.
Well, it's tough to get together to buy beer now, so it kind of.
I know. Yeah.
I guess you could get it shipped, especially across PA. It'll be doable. But yeah, like along the lines of like incremental change. So in one of my clients' cases, what we did there was that, for a while we had our big XPages app, and the way that would work was that we had like the XPages development team, and we had a designer making apps in JavaScript. And so she would say, here's the design, and then we would then implement it with XPages as a combination of like putting HTML in there. I'm like, I'll write a renderer and this will be nice and all this stuff. And so there was always this extra phase, and then eventually we were like, well, we have all these REST services, we could just expose those. And now she writes the app, and then we put it in an iframe so it shares the authentication with the XPage, and if we wanted to, we could have it communicate outside. So the goal is that this giant XPages app will have a set of links on the top, and it will essentially be the master of ceremonies for the whole thing, where you'll click on links and it will take you to this other iframe, and go from page to page. And then at some point those can take over and consume the entire thing, and now there's no XPages anymore. But that's one where it's like, the app itself is entirely Angular. It works with REST services. Like, there's nothing special about it. Like it can say, hey, I already have a cookie for authentication, I'll just use this. And then, it just can exist inside of that. And that's been a pleasant incremental way of doing it. We also have like a new module that's just, well, we'll put this in an NSF, but it's not XPages at all. But here, like this has been a very pleasant way of doing it, where we still have our XPages stuff, we still have that code, we're not throwing it away, except bit by bit, when it's like, okay, we want to do this but with a better UI. And so you can just essentially, it's kind of equivalent to using a whole bunch of JavaScript on the XPage, except now you don't have to deal with Dojo and whatever weird stuff is going on there. But like, that's been a very pleasant way of doing it, where we had code that years ago was just sitting in an NSF as XPages back Java code, which was in turn, like, it was originally Lotus script stuff, and then there was Java code in the NSF that was meant to emulate that. Then we moved that to a plugin, and then now where you have that being exposed via services, and then now it's so it is continuity, and which was the promise of XPages, that like you have this method for reusing your code. And so we did some rewrites and we did bring it there a little bit, but like that's been a reasonable way to do that. And that's been bit by bit. So like, as we're going, we learn more about writing REST services, and then our designer already knew how to do JavaScript stuff, but like doing those interactions is like that can be more incremental both in implementation and in learning, where you can say, you know what, I'm going to try this for just this one thing. I'll put an iframe on here, try this out, and then point here, where you don't have to redo the whole thing all at once. So that I've found to be a very reasonable way to do it without at any point just throwing away the whole thing, or at least not until we're done.
I had that kind of customer in the past. So that kind of projects that are moving little to outside of the environment, but at the end, I don't know, you can also end up with a highly complicated architecture which nobody knows, where nobody knows anything about the application
Job
from
security.
the outside.
Yeah.
Job
I'll say
security,
it.
Yeah.
Find those everywhere.
Yeah.
Trust me.
I mean, that is
If
one of
you're
the
a
nice things
customer, it's
about
not.
yeah.
If
It's the
you're a
nice thing about
customer, it's
REST
not-
services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, you could
That's
write REST
right.
services in COBOL if you wanted to, as long as it gets the data to the client. It doesn't matter how bad the code on the back end is.
Right.
But then I was thinking about, so with this new Jakarta stuff, I'm writing the entities and the services and things like that, which, you know, does all your storage into the relational databases. I was curious about reusing those exact libraries in XPages to also query the database using the same framework. Because obviously you can directly query a relational database and use the JDBC tools. But I was wondering if during a period of, you know, this straddling two systems, you could reuse the same entities library so that you're sort of, not duplicating that effort. Because also, obviously, it does that over REST. It converts the entities to JSON and then back again. But I was wondering if there was another way to get data between the two systems. But yeah, I guess it's that open liberty stuff, is it?
Well, I have that kind of like in between project, the XPages Jakarta EE support project, continuing in my pattern of having names that are sort of correct, but also very dry.
Yeah.
And essentially in that, I ported a couple things like newer, like I brought over the newer REST Easy and bean validation and a couple of those things into an NSF. Like some of the trouble you run into is that especially a lot of the newer APIs and newer versions of the APIs is that they like to scan the class path and say, oh, I find all the entities, find all the REST services, find all the whatever. And that doesn't really play very well with an NSF. But in theory, there should be nothing stopping you from using Hibernate for data storage. Like say you want to point that at a JDBC data source, you should be able to do that, because I think that in general that doesn't necessarily involve quite as much class path scanning, or at the very least you would be able to do the old style configuration XML. So like, yeah, essentially doing that, because the NSF like with XPages is kind of a Java EE app container, like with lots of weird oddities to it, but like you can put stuff in there, like you know, you can put REST services with @path and all that sort of thing, and have that sort of thing, and it kind of works. There's always a lot of like getting the library to load up and having it not conflict with stuff that exists in there already. Like for example, a lot of the XPages OSGI plugins will expose like I think some of them do, I forget if they do Java inject, but there's like Java activation, but it's an ancient crappy version, and then it depends on other stuff that's not there, and so you have to fight dependencies all the time and worrying about what it's going to pick up, what class where. So there's a whole lot of that on top of like the Java policy things and things like that. But so the answer is yes, you could, and so that would be a way to do it, where it's like, you know, you're moving to a different backend stored in there. You know, another thing that one could potentially do would be to do that, but then use the JNoSQL library, which is meant to be the NoSQL version of JPA. One could write a Domino driver for that and get that working in there. Like I wrote one a while ago, but it's terrible. But like that's the sort of thing where you could then use that kind of, it's the same idea of add entity and at column and things like that, and then do that in a more modern way, and then you'll have more options where your code will be cleaner. So even if you have to rewrite it all, it's easier to do so. But then you would then be able to just take a lot of that and then run it somewhere else without having to worry so much. So that's like that's an incremental in Java way of going about it, either whether or not you're migrating to something totally different, just kind of bringing some of that newer tech in, and then that makes the code nicer and, as a side effect, more portable.
But I'm not sure about it. Its stability in the long run, because that's strange. There is a strange servlet inside Xbase runtime engine, and it's involving itself into everything. And I had a lot of issues with my plugin developments in the time. There was simple problems of mine, like running stuff in behind, independent of these Xbase applications somehow. But this Xbase engine was trying to inject itself into everything, and that's why that has been a dream for me, using annotations and using JAX-RS inside NSF. And I think somehow there are two biggest problems in Xbase development model. One is that you cannot really create a RESTful service inside NSF, and it's much needed. And the current ways are not enough. The current traditional ways, I mean, using extension library, components, etc., they are not enough. And the second is, right now, the biggest missing link is that there is no agents, decent agents. And these two have solutions in terms of in our way, but these our ways are not feeling stable or long-term robust to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with that project I mentioned, which, by the way, I cribbed tremendously off of Martin to get that bootstrapped, to get that stuff working with a nice newer JAX-RS engine. Like, you can do annotations in there, but it gets back into the spot of like, well, if it's not official, then you do have to worry about like, well, if there's an edge case, how are you going to get it fixed necessarily? But the stuff when you're talking about where like the way that the XPages servlet container works is this kind of like bizarre nightmare where essentially the entire server is one web app, and then the XPages environment kind of breaks it down into individual like weird lifetime applications that are within it that try to pretend that they're completely separate, but they're not. And then it's also all the Expediter or Equinox kind of stuff, which is also weird. And it's all this stuff where like you have a project that like it always comes back with class path scanning, where like it'll projects expect to just get a jar file and say, okay, I'm going to look through this, but what they'll get is just dot, and be like, well, what the heck is that supposed to mean? And they don't know how to deal with an NSF, and they don't know what the URLs are, and it's like all this really weird stuff.
To put it right, in fact, the Xbase application is a subroutine in a huge servlet. So that's the biggest problem there. And you want to play with some things underneath, and it has a huge potential to fail. It didn't fail, by the way, so far. I mean, I'm running my code every 30 seconds. It handles my scheduled tasks in the background. I'm running my own ZATS engine in the background right now. It's not ZATS, but it's SOTS, let's say, automated stuff. And it runs perfectly for years, but every day, every upgrade, I say, yes, this is the last one. This is going to crash.
Yeah. Yep. All right. So I guess this would probably be a good time to wrap it up. So thank you all for joining. I figure I'll probably upload this, and then I enjoyed this, so I think I will do something similar in the future. I figured I especially after Collabsphere, I'm like, man, I actually like giving presentations. It's been a while, so I have a couple decks kind of in waiting. So hopefully I'll do a little bit more of this. But definitely thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you for setting
Thanks,
it
Jesse.
up.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks,
great to
Jesse.
see all your
I-
faces again, by the way.
I don't have a lot to offer in this space, so I just try to absorb what I can.
Well, don't sell yourself
Doing a
short
great
either.
job.
So. Yep. All right.
Okay.
So see you guys all around.
Okay.
Thanks.
See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Hey guys.
See ya.
Bye bye.
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 Bye.